Okay, we're stream now. Okay, we're live on Facebook, so we quickly introduce our host for today. And hello to all of our friends. Thank you for being with us for Friday Live. John and Catherine are on their way back base. He would love to be here with Julian and the rest of us, but I think next week he'll be able to join us. So today we want to say thank you, Buffy, for saying yes to be with Julie as our host. And of course, a wonderful Julie from Sweden. So we'll not take up much of your time. Over to you, Buffy.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. Welcome to Friday Live. Today we have a really amazing artist who loves to play with color and experiment with the entire Daniel Smith line of product. Ethel is going to put some links to her prior lives she's done demos for us that include Primatex and Luminescence, watercolor ground, and today she's going to be sharing her color play with gouache. She is an artist out of Sweden, but she is originally from Seattle, Washington, but she has painted all over the world, which is amazing with painting groups. And she shares her enthusiasm for color and inspiration to us all. Thank you so much for being here, Julie. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here.
What will you be sharing with us today?
So today I'm going to be painting some water birds. I'm not an expert on birds. Like I mentioned ahead of this, I apologize in advance to anyone who's an expert on birds. Any ornithologists out there, you may not recognize my birds, which is fine, but I'm just having fun with them. So it's I'm hoping they'll turn out looking somewhat like birds anyway.
Well,
and I'm going to be painting with gouache today.
Okay.
Gouache is very new for me. I was really interested when John mentioned that they were going to be making gouache in addition to the watercolors. To be honest, I wasn't that excited. When he mentioned that, I thought, oh.
Yeah.
And then I got to try them and I got really excited about them because they change the game entirely. It's not like any other gouache I've ever used before. So yeah, I'm hoping that some of you who are dyed-in-the-wool watercolorists can actually up your game and try a little bit of gouache because I think you'll really enjoy it.
Wonderful. Julie, would you like us to ask questions as you paint, or would you like us to wait until?
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. Go ahead and ask.
All right, we have Anna Marie and Ashley and Letty, and that will help us with questions from the chat and from Facebook. And we'd love, Ethel, is there any presentation before, or will we get right to painting?
Yeah. We do have the PowerPoint.
Wonderful, thank you.
Do a share screen now. Okay. There you go.
Thank you, Ethel.
Welcome. We'd love our friends to connect with you, Julie. So this is Julianne's handle on Instagram, where she regularly posts not just about gouache, but well, she started with watercolor and other medium. So the next couple of slides are sample artworks of Julie, including watercolor works, and we want to hear from Julie like short description of each of the artworks. This, I think, is one of Daniel Smith's favorites. It's a sort of, go ahead, Julie.
Yeah, this is one I actually started as a demo a few months back. And I found it in my pile. I'm sure none of the rest of you have those piles of things that are halfway done, maybe never get done. And I found it the other day and I thought, oh, I've got to finish it. This was done using the watercolor grounds. I used the transparent watercolor ground to put on the newsprint. So I had cut that into little strips. For those of you who don't know what watercolor ground is, it is a material medium that you can paint on almost any surface and make it watercolorable. You can also use it, as I have here, to put down thin papers. I've used it to adhere things. And then the fish themselves are on a black watercolor ground. So I painted those first totally black and then used the luminescent colors on top of them, and it just makes them pop. Unfortunately, you can't see the shimmer, but the luminescent colors are really, really fun.
Beautiful work.
This is gouache. It's actually a photo from Seattle when I was there the last time. I have been wanting to do a water fountain in watercolor, and I've never gotten it done. And then I realized maybe I could try it with gouache, and it was so much fun to try. This is actually it's on canvas. I wanted to see, I've been playing with the gouache to see what you can paint it on. And this was on canvas, and I didn't even prime it first with the watercolor ground. I just went directly onto it, and it worked. You can paint it on the gouache goes on almost anything you can paint acrylics on. It's got that Seattle gray feeling too. This is also gouache. This I painted on buff colored paper, kind of almost a coffee colored paper. I wanted to see what would happen when I did that, and the white gouache really makes those highlights pop. It was just for fun. I've just been really playing around. I have to confess, I'm new to this. I'm really new to gouache, so I don't feel like I'm an expert in any sense of the word. So I'm just playing around and yeah, really enjoying it.
The saturation in that painting is really kind of debunks a lot of my thinking about gouache being matte and flat. I mean, it's just so vibrant. Beautiful work.
Thank you, Buffy. Okay, I got inspiration from Angela. She painted, if you haven't checked out some of her paintings, you need to do that, Angela Barbie. She painted the Three Wise Men, and she did it on gold watercolor ground. So I thought, oh, that's such a cool idea. So I had some gold paper. I've used it sometimes for framing. So it's not a watercolor paper. It's actually a metallic kind of a gold. And I just wanted to see if you could do something with it. So I started with the bees. I like the bees a lot. And then I figured the bees had to go to something. So I put in a little lavender, maybe not as crazy about it, but I still think it was a lot of fun to do. And this is similar to what I'm going to be doing today. This is an oyster catcher. And we have them in town here in Jönköping in mid-southern Sweden. And I see them in our roundabouts, in the middle of the roundabouts in town. I don't know why I see them there instead of down on the waterfront. They look so comical as they're walking around the roundabouts. It looks like they're trying to direct the traffic. So anyway, they've kind of caught my attention. And one of the things that I've been wanting to do for a long time is the bouquet effect in the background with all the dots. You can say I kind of got carried away. There ended up being lots and lots of dots on that one. I just couldn't get stopped once I got going. And so that's what I'm going to be trying to do today a little bit too. It's, I say bouquet, I've heard it pronounced many different ways, but what it is the dots that you see in the background. You often in photographs find light in the back of a photograph, and it'll be in different dots. And that's the effect that I was working with.
Wonderful.
Yeah, and black watercolor paper is really fun too. I don't know how many of you have ever tried black watercolor paper. You have to kind of think backwards. Instead of putting in your darks, you're putting in your lights. So it was a lot of fun. I have had a love affair with zebras since we lived in South Africa. And it was a fun way to do it. There's an encaustic painter I really like, and she does hands that are amazing. And it's made me realize I want to work more on doing hands. So I thought if I paint my hand and the zebra, it'll kind of give me a chance to work on both. And the eyes on the zebra, I used bronzite. That was a tip that we got the other day with the bronzite giving a sparkle to the eye. It was gorgeous. I really, really like it. This was just for fun. This is gray paper. I think it's pastel paper, but I'm not even sure. And what I wanted to do is try out the darks and the lights and some of the luminescent colors. And I've got it here in front of me right now. Can you switch to my other camera for a moment? That might be the last photo too, I'm not sure. There.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Right.
here, if I move it around, can you see what's happening?
Yeah.
The lights kind of go on and off.
Oh,
In the trees?
yeah.
So this is white gouache, but it's also the luminescent gouaches as well. So this was just totally on a lark. It was just for fun, but I wanted to see what would happen. So play. That's my greatest advice to you all, is just play and enjoy it. So,
Well, Julie, already just from your slideshow, the chat is alive with people, questions and inspiration.
how fun.
The bees are beautiful. I think many of us are thinking about all the paper we have that we haven't been using that we can pull out and use with gouache now. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Oh, you're welcome. Oh, that's fun. One of the things, like you mentioned, Buffy, paper has been an issue for me with watercolor because paper can go bad. I don't know how many of you have experienced that, especially if you live in a place that's either dry or moist, but the paper can go bad. And when you try and use watercolor on it, it just doesn't work.
Yep.
But you can use gouache on that paper. So that is so much fun. So the paper that I'm going to be painting on tonight is not wonderful watercolor paper. And I did that on purpose. It's actually student grade paper. It's
Ooh.
Hahnemühle paper called Harmony. And it is acid free. So it's
Okay.
not going to yellow. And it does have a fine tooth. It's like a fine grain paper. I found that when I paint watercolor, I like to use the rougher papers, but with gouache, it's a lot easier to do it on a hot press or a fine grained paper. So this is Hahnemühle. It's a half sheet.
We have a quick question in Facebook, and they're curious about the weight of the papers. Not
It's
just
300
the white
grams.
paper,
That's generally what I use.
The gray and the black paper weights. Thank you.
Yes, the gray was 250 and the black one was 300, actually.
Thank you.
So the colors that I'm going to be using are these. It's a really, okay, I've been trying out the grays and the blacks a lot. I love Payne's blue gray. And that hasn't been made into gouache yet. I'm hoping we can talk John into that. But the grays and the blacks are so amazing anyway. I really like them. So I've been playing with a mixture of the different grays and blacks and mixing some of the blues into it. And I don't know if you can see here, I've mixed pearlescent white into some of these as well, which I think the pearlescent white is a really, really fun color. Can you see how it shimmers here?
Yeah.
And I've put it into the lavender, into hematite. It's so cool. It is just really, really fun into hematite. Let's see if I can get it to shimmer. Can you see it?
Yes. That's amazing.
And that is really fun. And I put it in with the Payne's gray here.
What a wonderful discovery. So we can basically make any of our gouache colors pearlescent, iridescent, thanks to that tip. Thank you so much. I'll be using that one.
Good. It is just so much fun. So yeah. So these are the colors I'm going to be using today. Very blue, very gray. And then I have a little orange to give it a pop. So I'm hoping that's going to work. I've been swatching these. I'm still very much a watercolorist. I love water, and I wanted to see, especially if the Primitex work well with a lot of water in the gouache, and they do. They still granulate and do some really fun things. I know John might not approve of me turning them into watercolors, but I'm having fun with it. So that's what I figure counts. The luminescent ones shine really well on a dark background. Even if you paint with darker colors and just put in a little bit, they just pop. I also tried doing the gouache, like this is the King's Royal Blue on just black paper. And yeah, it just works really, really well. These are some of the different grays and blacks and hematite. I'm not used to seeing hematite as a brown color. I always think of it more as a granite, because when I use a lot of water with it, it makes really fun things. So anyway, I saw there was a question about the luminescent colors. Is that right?
Let me see. 1 second.
I think it was Jane. She asked, what is the difference between iridescent and luminescent?
Okay, really good question. Luminescent is kind of a catch-all, as I understand it, for all of these metallic, shimmery, shiny colors that can both have duochrome. They have 2 color shifts that they can do. They can catch the light. So I think they're all under the category of luminescent. Some of them are interference, iridescent, duochrome. There are lots of different explanations for them, and pearlescent. And the pearlescent ones are generally the ones that look like they've come out of the inside of an oyster shell. They have that shimmery look on them. Some of them look more metallic. Some of them shift from one color to another, which I think is really cool. That something that's blue on one kind of paper or one kind of color can go black on another one, or dark or gold. So there are lots of alternatives to a lot of the things. I know that John has written up some really good things, or there's some really good information. Thank you. I see that you've put that link there. Do take a look at the luminescents. They're really, really fun. Okay, so do you have any more questions, Buffy? I'm just taking over, aren't I?
Oh, you're doing great. No. There was a couple questions back from the initial slideshow. The fish on the newsprint, I still remember that demo, how amazing that instruction was. So some people were asking how you adhered the wording, because you had your newspaper print and then you put some specific clippings on it. Did you use a matte medium to adhere those, or
I mostly use the watercolor ground, the transparent watercolor ground. You could also use another adhesive on it, but I just found the ground worked really well, because sometimes you get little bleeds that come out and then it doesn't take the watercolor well. So I found that with the transparent ground, it worked really, really well.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I think
Okay.
we're set.
So I have a reference photo here, and these are oyster catchers. And they're just really cool looking birds with gangly legs and long bills, long beaks. And you'd never see their eyes, or I never see their eyes, which makes it really easy to paint. So I cheated. I don't have a good track record on getting finished with a demo. I'm so impressed with people that can get all the way through. Stella, who can do multiple paintings during a demo. I don't get that far. So I cheated. I started a little bit. So I've sketched out my 2 oyster catchers here. And I'll just go to work. And this is a reference. This is that bouquet effect where you have the dots, like the sunlight on the water.
Yes.
Or here again on the water. It's a magical effect to me. And I really think it's fun because you can do that really, really well with the gouache. And I'll show you, I'll try and get far enough along so that we can get a little bit of that done. So the gouache paints, unlike watercolor, don't go on thin. With watercolor, I use a lot of water. I use a lot of paint, but I always have the water really, really going through so that I get a lot of granulation, a lot of fun things happening. But the gouache paints, you paint them directly from the tube. you can use a tiny bit of water, but the idea is that they're much, much more opaque. And so when I go in and paint, I'm using thick paint. I'm not watering it down, so I'm not dipping into my water all the time. And I can go in and lay down a background. I'm using Alvaro's Fresco Gray. I really like that one. And together with some of these blues, it turns out really, really nice. So what I'm doing is I'm going in and I'm just putting in a background. Doesn't matter if there's a little bit of the white paper that shines through, that's fine. And instead of watering it down, I'm using it quite thick. So somebody was talking about the difference in the look of gouache compared with watercolor. And that's one of the things I thought I didn't like because it looked really, really dull and lifeless. I don't think this does though. It has a velvety kind of a texture since you're painting thick with it. But it turns out to have a lot of vibrancy in the color anyway. And I like to have really wet paint, the same consistency as when it comes out of the tube. And so what I've done is in my palette, I don't have very many colors in my palette. I'm still figuring out which colors are my colors. So I've been putting them into little half pans mostly and trying out a lot of the different colors. And then when I find ones that I know I want to have, then I'll put them in a spot and use those anyway. And what I've done is I have a little sponge that I wet and I put it in my palette, close it up, and then it keeps it wet till tomorrow. So it's not runny wet, but it's like fresh paint from the tube, which makes it a lot easier. And then I just moisten my brush slightly.
That's a great tip too. I love that you kind of hold them hostage for a while and determine if they're going to make it into your palette or not. I love that. You're on a trial basis.
And if you behave, you get to play with the rest of the colors.
Right?
I found too, which is really, it was really a surprise to me. I found that I'm not using the same colors that I would use necessarily in water. Okay. Cobalt blue is always a favorite. I think I've put cobalt blue into nearly every painting I've ever done. I purposely tried one time not to use cobalt, and the painting never felt done until I finally went back and put some cobalt into it, and then it finally was finished. So, but I've been using a lot of different colors. I've tried Bordeaux. I'm not using it tonight, but it's a gorgeous color, and I've never even tried it in watercolor before. I think I've had it too, but I don't think I've ever actually used it. So I'm discovering a lot of really fun ones. Piemontite is really fun in the gouaches as well. So I'm really enjoying that. I was so impressed. Last week, Carlos Avellino had the demonstration. And I have to say, I was so impressed with what a neat painter he was. He had paints put out in order, and he just used them really carefully. I think I'm a really messy painter. I was just really impressed with him. I don't know, maybe it's only me. Maybe I'm the only messy painter out there. But I was so impressed with the way that he kept all of his paints separate and kept them clean. Mine don't work that way.
Isn't that such a fun part of demos, is seeing the supplies that the artist used? Or like here, we get a peek into your studio. I mean, there's just so many interesting things we learn besides just the painting techniques in these demos.
So true. So true. It's really fun. I think I appreciate
Ashley,
the
I love that.
diversity.
Actually, that is so true. And I'm always looking around too and see what the artist is doing. And Julie, I think part of the energy of your painting is because of the way that you paint. I mean, that's coming through. The energy and the life coming through.
Thank you. That's sweet. Thank you. Semi-chaotic, maybe. I don't know.
I think a lot of us find after participating in these live lectures that we always come away with a shopping list.
This is really true, isn't it? Another color that I've been using a lot is buff titanium. It mixes really great with the grays, with the blues. I really like what it's doing. So that's another one that I think since the gouache gets lightened by adding white instead of water like you would with watercolor, I think buff is a great alternative. Buff and cobalt blue are absolutely gorgeous. They make the coolest gray. So I really like what buff titanium is doing. So I'm trying to leave a little bit of light on this. Okay, one thing too, I'm using paint brushes that are not my watercolor brushes. I dipped into my acrylic. I paint with acrylics once in a while. And these are my brushes for acrylics. My watercolor brushes tend to be very thirsty brushes. I use a lot of natural hair sables, natural mixes, and they're fairly soft. They're firm enough to give me what I want them to do, but they're soft enough that they hold a lot of water. These are not that. These are acrylics. It's Raphael brushes. And they're filberts or brights, I think they're called. I do not know much about oil brushes or acrylic brushes, but these are really, really nice. And I found that they really hold the paint in a good way. So when I first got the gouache paint and started working with it, I was just frustrated. I couldn't get it on the paper with the paintbrushes I was using. It just did not want to work. And it wasn't until I started using firmer brushes that all of a sudden it was a total game changer for me. That just made all the difference in the world.
Did you typically use that filbert shaped, because it's kind of like an oval wash brush? Did you use that in watercolor also?
No. I mostly use round ones. I do have a few flat brushes, but I've never used a filbert with watercolor, although I might end up trying it. I'm really enjoying it.
I just recently started painting with that shaped brush and I'm in love.
With watercolor?
With that shape brush, the filbert.
Yeah.
Some brands will call them oval wash or petal wash. I've even seen them cat's tongue where they're a little pointed at the end.
Yes.
And
yeah.
It's
The
fun.
cat's tongue one, I have a couple of those. And I have used those once in a while. There's a little bit of a learning curve, I think, with those, but they're great brushes.
So with gouache, you were sharing that you can play with many different substrates, different types of papers. You shared that it's brought you into a relationship with some new colors.
Definitely.
And even a new brush shape. So that's really exciting.
Yeah, I feel like it's really broadening me. And I'm naturally very curious when it comes to art supplies. I have an amazing husband who's very supportive and is out there cheering me on. He helps me do a lot of framing and drives me all around to shows and classes. But he keeps saying, why don't you just stick with one thing? Why do you need to try doing this and that? Now you're doing watercolor and that's great. And how come you need to? But I feel like part of the whole experience is getting to try other things too and seeing how they play together and seeing what happens.
Yeah, I think you have an artistic soul, Julie, that you are always going to be a child at heart and always exploring. Even on your dot card, I love the part where you say that the 3 years in South Africa gave you an appreciation for seeing and learning more, discovering new techniques and a curiosity for painting outside the lines. And I think that really is just such a beautiful statement there.
I'll never forget watching a woman paint in South Africa. She was using a matchstick. I was just blown away by what she could do with a matchstick. It was just amazing. So
One of my favorite things to say is start where you are and use what you have. Because if you can get really good with those tools and those products, you really can grow so much quicker. I mean, it is just play, right?
Exactly. Oh, that's so true. So true. Okay, one of the things I like about the gouache, it's different than any other gouache. The Daniel Smith gouache is not what I had experienced previously with gouache paint. Many gouaches, as I understand it, have an acrylic base, and it makes them really hard to re-wet. And that's one of the things I really didn't like about it. I felt like every time I had put out my gouache, I had to throw it away. It was more like using acrylic that way. It just did not re-wet well. These are totally different. As I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, but in my understanding, it's watercolor. Basically, it's the same pigment, it's the same binder. It's not acrylics, which is also really good to limit our microplastic that goes out in the water. I like that. And they re-wet really well. So if my palette dries, I can just spray it with a little water, go have my cup of coffee, come back, and they're perfect to keep working with. I really, really like that. Plus, I can go into the paintings that I've done, and I can keep mixing the paints. You can mix layers, you can lay in more layers, but you can also take away things. So every once in a while, I'll get paint somewhere where I hadn't intended on putting it. And it just turns out really, really well when you go in and take it off. And that's what I'm going to show you in just 2 seconds here. It dries super fast because you don't use a lot of water in it. It just really dries very, very fast, which seemed frustrating, but now that I've been playing with it longer, I've found that it's really, really helpful because you can go back in and you can work with it some more. So what I'm going to do, like there, I got a little bit over the black, and I can fix that by taking it away. Okay, I'm going to just jump down here and put a little bit of water. The legs on my bird go down here. So I'm going to jump around a little bit, trying to leave a little bit of light around him. So I've got his legs there, painting between the legs. And switch to a small. Another thing that's really cool is you can leave your paint on your brushes. You don't have to go in and wet them down and start all over again. I can pick that one up and go back into it. I've also discovered that instead of dipping my paintbrush into the water bucket, I can spray a little bit of paint or a little bit of water here on my palette, and I can get my water there instead, because I only need a tiny, tiny, tiny little bit. Okay, so his legs are going down here, and then there's a reflection coming here. I don't think I'm going to get that far, probably. I will finish this up at some point and post it on my Instagram account so you can see what it looks like when it finally gets finished. I promise I'll try and do it faster than I did those fish.
You still have a lot of time left. You're only about halfway through.
I know, but I keep talking too much, don't I?
Oh my gosh, but it's so helpful. All of the tips and all of the things that you're sharing is just a treasure trove of resources for all of us who are learning how to paint with gouache.
Oh, thank you. That's very, very generous.
Yeah, the chat rooms. I love the talking Diane says.
Okay, I was born in the States. I may live in Sweden now, and Swedes are very, very sweet and considerate and a little more quiet and subdued, but I'm afraid that American gene is just really strong. In my family, it's called the talking gene. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into this area, and I want to have some of that bouquet, like I talked about before, going on. I want to have some of those sparkles in the water. So something sort of like this. Because I'm not following all the rules. If I had light that was coming from there, actually this should be a little bit darker, but you know what, I'm making it up as we go along. So what I can do now is I can go back into this, and the whole idea with bouquet is you've got the light that makes these big dots, and I can go in and I can take away paint, and it's dry already, what I did there. So now I just put a little bit more water, and that's one of the reasons I like these filberts or brights, the rounded tip, because I can get that really, really nicely there. Can you see that it's coming off really well?
Yes.
And that's something you cannot do with other gouache paints. The ones that I have tried previously would never do this. They're much more like acrylics in that aspect, that once they're on, they're on.
So just in case anyone's tuning in right now, because this is a really big part of this piece that you're painting, you're not putting white on right now, correct?
No, I'm
Ready
taking off paint.
and lifting. Yes.
I'm just lifting it, and that white that you're seeing, that's the watercolor paper.
That is a wonderful tip. Oh my goodness.
And you need to have paper that's going to hold up to that, obviously. But you can literally paint this on anything, it feels like. So far, I've painted it on really bad watercolor paper. Like I said, this is student grade or study grade. So it's not the most expensive watercolor paper that I've got. It's just real easy to come by stuff. And I can take out some of the highlights on the water. So instead of having to paint around all those whites and save those, it changes things. It gives you so many other possibilities. Like with the fountain that I did before, I could paint in some of the grays and then lift them and end up with my whites.
That's a wonderful use of lifting. That's amazing.
And then I can go in, I've got the buff titanium. I can also go in and I can put in some of that. Okay, I can never figure out what is the right amount to have on this. If you see my reference photo, it's got this nice little, it's got nice little groupings of this. When I do it, it ends up more like this. I'm having so much fun that I just don't know when to stop. I also found I've got a rubber shaper, I use it when I use masking fluid. And I found that it's also really, really nice if I just want to do small dots of this. You can use the color on there. I can go in with the titanium white now. And it has just enough of a kick that it looks different from what I've lifted as well.
Yes. So you get the softer muted where you've lifted, and then the brighter. That's really clever.
So it makes a really, really nice variation, I think.
Mm-hmm. I know this might sound a little off, but when you showed the painting you've done of this before, and you were sharing that bokeh effect or bouquet
That
effect.
one, yeah.
I could almost hear the sound of like when when the wave crashes and then it has that little like noise. I could almost hear that. And so I thought that that was so beautiful that not only is your artwork so, well done and beautiful and expressive, but I could actually hear a sound by memory from looking at
Oh,
your
I
work.
love that. Thank you. That makes me feel really good.
Julie, you got a beautiful comment from Diane. She said about you, she said, she knows so much. She's a great teacher. She's so
Oh.
good now. Can you imagine how much more she's going to discover? I love her.
Oh,
That's very
thank
sweet.
you. That is so, oh, you guys are just making my day. I'm going to be living on this for forever.
Ditto, ditto. You're my
Okay, so now I've dipped into this pearlescent white. And I'm putting a little bit of that in here as well. And let's see if I can move this. It's not quite dry, but almost. I don't know. Can you see the shimmer? Maybe you can't see it from here. But where the pearlescent white is, it just gives you that kind of live water feeling where the sun catches in the water. Okay, I'm going to do lots more of that, but I'm going to move on from there. You get the idea, I think?
Yes, yes.
And go back into my birds again. Let's see, I'm going to switch it up, take a larger brush. I just want to cover a little more area here. Like I said, these are my acrylic brushes, which just was a huge surprise to me that they worked so well doing them with the gouache. And like I said before, my watercolor brushes just didn't work. I was not a happy camper when I was trying to use them. I love water. I have most of my life lived near water. And I'm so thankful for that. It's just one of those things that I value so much. And the play, we actually can see, we have the second largest lake in Sweden. Lake Vättern is out of our window. I'm actually sitting in my kitchen. And if it was daylight instead of dark, you could see the water out there. And I think that's the best painting we have, actually. It's so beautiful to see how alive a landscape is when there's water. I know those of you who live near water or paint water will, I'm sure, agree. And like you were saying before, there's so many different styles, so many different ways to paint too, that I think it's so fun. The water can do so many different things. It can move in different ways. The light can hit it in different ways. It just does so much. So it's a never ending.
Julie, could you address the color shift with gouache? Have you noticed that as it dries, the color changes at all?
It does. Watercolor generally lightens when you use it. It goes, some colors like indigo, for example, goes really, really light when it dries compared to when it's wet. Gouache darkens, in my experience, a little bit. It's more like acrylic that way. So it goes slightly darker. And of course, it goes a little bit matte as well. It's not shiny, it's not transparent, but it does darken slightly. What do the rest of you say that have been using the gouache? What do you think? Am I right?
I would agree with that. I think the shift isn't as strong as other gouache brands that I've tried. So I feel like it's a little more true, but the thicker it is, like the more mass tone it is, I feel like there's a little bit of a shift.
Yeah.
Would you recommend swatching the colors? Because I know that you swatched your gouache colors much like we do with watercolor. Do you recommend doing that so we can see that shift
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to do it, actually. Okay, now I'm into my paint, into my mastone all over my sleeve. Yeah, I think swatching them is great. I think that's a really, really good way of doing it. I was actually thinking of taking the watercolors and swatching those together with the gouache just to compare.
Yeah.
I haven't done it yet. Has anybody else out there done that?
I have been playing with watering down some of the gouaches to
Mhm.
see what they do, because that was another thing I discovered is like the Cascade green will kind of
Yeah.
pull apart and the colors will kind of separate, much like the watercolor. But
Yeah.
the Cascade green gouache and the Cascade green watercolor, they are a little different. They're the same as far as the ingredients, right? The same
Right.
pigment and binder, but they're I don't know, they dry a little different. I
It's
guess the
kind of like
saturation.
it's kind of like twins that are
Yes,
almost identical.
yes, yes.
Yeah, no, I agree with that because if you do water it down, it does some really fun things, but it's different. It's just
Yeah.
different, isn't it?
What color black did you use for the oyster catcher's head? Because I see it's darker than the body.
Yeah,
Cover.
that is Jane's black. And
Okay.
it's the red green mix. There are two of them. There's one that's blue, a blue orange combination. And there's one that is a red green. And I thought I was going to I'm such a blue person. Can you tell? I thought I was going to like the blue orange combination. This is the red green combination on there. And when I lighten it with a little bit of white in it, it feels like it goes bluer than the other one does too. I really like it. It's a really true black.
And Diane is asking if you varnish your gouaches.
Okay, so the ones that I've done on paper, I haven't. I've just put those in glass.
Okay.
But the one I've got this one here. Let me see. I've been working fairly small so far. I was afraid my gouache would run out. So this one's on canvas. It's on stretched canvas, if you see.
Yeah.
And I did varnish this. I used actually an acrylic matte spray. You could use a watercolor varnish, I think, on it as well. You have to be careful because you don't want it to get so watery that it starts to run. But that worked really well. I did a really fine mist of the acrylic varnish, and then I went back into it and did a little bit more.
Thank you.
Earlier, we were
ahead.
able to see your paintings with the fish and the newspaper and how you were able to get the words of the newspaper connected and painted on. Are you willing to talk to us more about your mixed media and your love there?
Sure. That's another thing that I think has been so much fun. I think the line between watercolor and mixed media, or watercolor and acrylics even, is blurred more and more because it's possible to do so many different things when you've got the possibility of going in with these watercolor grounds. So, for example, putting in the paper like that, or going in, I've used cheesecloth sometimes and glued that in with it as well. And I find that's really, really fun because you get such great textures. So I've got a few projects going on. I've got a class, any of you who are near Jönköping in Sweden, I've got a class coming up on a weekend using some of the watercolor grounds and different things. So we're going to do mixed media. I just really find it's a fun way to expand on what you can do with the watercolor.
And if somebody would like to take that class, how would they go about? Can they email you or reach out to you on Instagram?
Yeah, just message me on Instagram and I'll send you all the information you need.
Thank you.
And you can see here, I'm leaving some of the white paper. That's the fun thing. I can paint white, but I can leave white as well. I really, really like that.
Have you ever taken the gouache yet for some of your travel painting groups or your plein air painting?
I haven't. At this point, I don't think the gouache is actually available, as far as I know, in Sweden. I hope I'm wrong, and I hope it's on its way in. So I'd like to. I've already had a few requests about doing a gouache class. So I am hoping that if there's interest, that we'll be able to do that. It travels really well, and since there's no acrylic in it, it's not sensitive to temperature. Like acrylic doesn't travel that well if you pack it in your suitcase. In the airplane, it can get too cold and it can degrade the acrylic. But gouache, since it has no acrylic in there, it's fine. So it'd be really easy to travel with.
Mhm.
Okay, so this poor little bird over here, it looks like he may not be getting finished. But what I wanted to do is get down. I've got the this little guy is in the water, and you can see here, let's see if I've got him up. He's got his legs are in the water. I'm going to just mix in. Now I'm watering this down a little bit. I do have cadmium orange, which is a color I never, ever, ever use. I'm very much a blue person, very much not a orange person, but I've got a little bit of piemontite. I don't know how everybody else says that. I say it piemontite. And a little bit of this orange in there. And his legs are just slightly orange. It's got those huge knees. I think it's so cool. God put birds' legs on backwards. Have you ever thought about that?
Hon är ju ett med penseln. Alltså, det är ju hennes förlängda fingrar. Helt otroligt. Att hon kan prata samtidigt också.
Oh, the problem is trying to make me be quiet.
Audrey asks, what part of Sweden are you in? Are you in Stockholm?
No, I'm in Jönköping. Jönköping is mid-southern Sweden, I would say. If I say it's southern Sweden, people get mad at me, but it's not. It's the middle of Sweden in the southern part. And if you look on a map, you'll see there are two larger lakes, and we're in the very southern tip of the second largest one.
Okay.
You can wave to me. If you look at the map of Sweden, you can actually wave to me because I can see the southern tip out my window here.
Belle shared that her family is from Kalmar.
Oh, fun. Yeah, that's not too far. Now, Sweden is roughly the size and shape of California. So it's not huge, but it's kind of long and thin. Okay, so now I'm getting a little watercolory here. I added a little bit of a little bit of piemontite or a little hematite, just to give it a little bit darker color underneath, and it's a little bit watery, maybe a little too watery, but it's working. The hematite works totally different in gouache. Like I said, I'm used to it being more of I use it with a lot of water when I paint watercolor. And in the gouache, it's this really interesting brown color, but I'm gonna break all the rules. I'm gonna water it down. So here I'm going in with a little bit of water ahead of time, just to give myself a head start on that.
That's
And even like-
wonderful because there was a discussion in the chat about this. So this is wonderful.
I
Thank you
don't
for
know
sharing.
that this is protocol for painting gouache, but it works. So I'm gonna just go ahead. So I'm
You know what?
watering it.
This is playtime with Julie. So we are here for
Exactly.
this.
Yeah. You know, I've always been so envious of people who always know what they want to be and what they want to do with their lives.
Ooh.
I haven't figured that out, but I'm 64. So I figure by the time I retire, I'll have a chance to figure it out. And I think breaking all the rules and playing, that definitely appeals to me. Okay, so here is hematite. And see how lovely it is. I mean, it just has that wonderful granite snakeskin kind of a look. Hematite is really, really fun. You can actually, it's got so much iron in it. It's pure mineral and just a little bit of binder. And there's even more pure mineral in the gouache. So if you take a magnet and hold it over your paint here, it actually jumps off the page. I have a magnet that now permanently has hematite on it because I can't get it off the magnet. So what you can do is take a single sheet of paper and lots of water, and then take your magnet on the back side of the bottom side of the paper instead. And that way you don't end up with a magnet full of hematite. But it's so cool because when I was a little kid, we had a little, it was a little thing with iron shavings and a magnet. And you could move it around, the iron shavings, and you could put a little mustache and a beard on a little man that was there. Well, hematite is basically the metal shavings. It works that same way. Okay, so here, can you see the wonderful granulation in this? Hematite's just too much fun not to water down.
Julie, that is just absolutely beautiful how you shared the thicker application of the gouache and now the watered to create that sand effect. We have just a couple more minutes together. Is there anything that you would like to share as we close out?
Just play. I think one of the things that I love about this Daniel Smith family is the variety. We were talking about that earlier. Everybody has a different artistic voice. People use different colors. They have different styles. And I love it because I always come away inspired to try something new. And I think there's so much to that. I think it's just really, really, I think it's a stretching experience. I think it's really, really good that way. So I hope, if nothing else, I hope you guys will want to try some of the gouache paints and just play. You can mix them freely with the watercolors as well. The watercolors and the gouache work great together. So don't hesitate to do that. Okay, I'm going to leave this here and it will get finished at some point and I will post it on my Instagram account.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Julie, for inspiring us to play with our products and our papers and our paints and our brushes and to try new colors. You are always an inspiration. Your fish on newsprint live was one of my very favorite demos of Daniel Smith hosting ever. And we just really appreciate you taking the time to share your gifts with us.
Thank you so much, Buffy. Thank you, everybody, for giving me your Friday. I really appreciate getting to meet like this. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Julie.
I want to say thank you to
Thanks,
Buffy
Julie.
for being
That
a
was
great
wonderful.
host
It was
today.
amazing.
Thank you, Buffy.
Thank
You're a great
you.
Have a
hostess.
good day,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Thank you, Giovanni.